What happens when silence speaks louder than words? In a chamber filled with powerful alien leaders, one young human woman dares to hold the gaze of a feared warlord without saying a single word. No weapons, no threats, just a stare that stops time and shifts the future of humanity forever. Stay with us because this isn't just a story. It's the moment everything changed. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The space station hung in orbit like a sleeping giant, its metal shell reflecting the light of a distant sun. Inside, the air was too still for comfort, thick with tension. It was a silence that didn't come from peace but from caution, like everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. The wide chamber where the Interstellar Council met was polished and grand, its circular walls lit with a soft white glow. Dozens of alien representatives sat at long curved tables, their strange features lit by the flicker of quiet screens and glowing translation devices. Lenara Vale sat near the edge of Earth's delegation, trying not to fidget. Her black uniform fit neatly, her posture was upright, but her hands were locked together beneath the table. She was young for this assignment, too young, some thought, but she wasn't chosen by accident. She had a gift for observation, for listening when others spoke too much and for catching what others missed. Earth had only recently been invited to send observers to the Galactic Council. Humans were still new here, too new, and the older species didn't let them forget it. Lenara could feel their eyes now and then, or maybe it was just her imagination. Either way, she didn't look around. She simply listened and watched. Her easy, dark eyes moved slowly, carefully taking in every shift, every sound, every glance. Some species shimmered like mist. Others spoke with light, and some made clicking sounds that bounced off the metal walls. She was fascinated, but she didn't let it show. Curiosity could be seen as weakness here. Most of the focus in the room was on the central table, where a few key species spoke in turns. But Lenara's gaze drifted to the far side of the room, where someone sat alone. His seat was larger, darker, almost carved from stone. The figure who filled it wasn't moving. He sat still, heavy and silent like a mountain in a storm. His name was General Vorthak, leader of the Elthrin, an ancient warrior race known for their long memory and few words. Lenara had seen his image once before in a military briefing. The file was short, but the warnings were long. Vorthak had led his people through wars older than humanity's spaceflight. He rarely spoke at diplomatic events, and when he did, people listened. Not because of fear, though there was plenty of that, but because every word he used had weight. Now he was here in the same room, no longer a legend on a screen. Lenara tried not to stare, but she found it difficult. His armor looked almost grown rather than worn, a dark, dull metal that seemed part of him. Two eyes glowed faint orange beneath a thick, ridged brow. They moved slowly across the room, scanning, not nervously, not sharply, but deliberately, as if noting every presence and remembering them. When those eyes met hers, she didn't mean to freeze, but she did. Her breath caught in her throat, her fingers clenched tighter under the table. Nothing else in the room changed. No alarm sounded. No one noticed. But to her, time slowed. Vorthak didn't blink. His eyes held hers with a stillness that was not threatening but powerful. She could not read him. He didn't move except for the faintest tilt of his head. It was enough to say he saw her. It was enough to say he knew she'd been watching. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Lenara's heart thudded in her chest. She remembered something her mother once told her when they'd seen a wild animal in the forest as a child. "Don't run," her mother said. "Look it in the eye. Let it know you're not afraid." She didn't look away. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She kept her face calm, though inside her thoughts raced. Why was he looking at her? Why now? Was it just chance, or had he noticed something? Then something subtle happened. His expression didn't change, but one of his heavy brows lifted, just slightly. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't a threat. It was interest. A question without words. Who are you? Lenara didn't answer. She couldn't. But she did something just as clear. She raised her chin, just a little. Not defiant, but firm. I'm here, I see you, and I'm not afraid. After a few seconds that felt much longer, Vorthak looked away, not quickly, not dismissively. It was more like setting a thought aside, like saving it for later. His clawed hand tapped once on the arm of his chair. Then again. A quiet sound, but somehow important. Lenara exhaled slowly, the breath coming, out like a whisper. She blinked twice, her vision clearing, and turned back toward her team. No one seemed to have noticed. The conversation at the council continued, filled with lights and tones and strange languages. But Lenara felt different, now like something had shifted just a little. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't know if it was good or bad, but one thing was certain. She had been seen, truly seen, by one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, and he hadn't looked away in disgust or amusement. He had looked with curiosity. That was the beginning. And Lenara knew beginnings always mattered. The hours in the council chamber passed slowly, measured not by clocks, but by cautious voices and the hum of alien technology. Lenara sat still, yet her mind was far from quiet. The moment between her and General Vorthak stayed fresh in her thoughts, repeating over and over like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Why had he noticed her? Why had he held her gaze so long? It had been more than a glance. It had felt like recognition, though she couldn't explain why. Around her, the other council members continued their discussions. Some floated, some sat, and others seemed to melt into light. Their voices moved through translation orbs that shimmered softly in the air, turning chirps and pulses into words that humans could understand. But none of those voices reached Lenara. Her ears heard them, but her thoughts stayed locked on what had just happened. Even now, hours later, she could feel it, that quiet connection across the room. She thought of Vorthak again. He hadn't spoken, not a word, but something had passed between them, a kind of silent message. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe he looked at everyone like that. But Lenara didn't believe that. Something about the stare had been too precise, too personal. It was as if he had been looking past her uniform, past her role as a delegate, and into something more. That thought unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. The room shifted. A new speaker took the center stage. The tall, glass-skinned Alari delegate floated forward in silence, her fingers weaving symbols in the air. A bright language of light danced from her fingertips, filling the room with gentle patterns that turned into words. Lenara looked up, trying to focus, but her attention was stolen again. Vorthak hadn't moved. He still sat in the shadows at the far end of the chamber, still and watchful like a statue that breathed. But every few moments, Lenara could feel his gaze return to her. She did not meet it this time. Not because she was afraid, but because she needed to think. Her heart no longer raced, but her mind did. What did it mean to be seen by someone like him? A warrior who had lived through star-born wars, who had likely crushed enemies without a second thought. And yet he had looked at her not with hate, not with anger, but with something else. Lenara remembered a moment from her childhood when her father showed her how to hold steel in the forge back home. "It's not the fire that shapes the metal," he had said. "It's how long you can hold it steady." She understood that now. She felt like she was still in that fire under pressure, being tested, but she wasn't ready to melt. Not yet. Her fingers tapped gently on her lap, a silent rhythm to calm her nerves. She wasn't the kind of person who liked attention. She had always preferred to stand just behind the noise, watching, learning. But now she was in the center of something she didn't fully understand. Something important. A soft whisper caught her ear. It wasn't human. A small creature no taller than her knee had stepped closer to her seat. Its skin shimmered with soft green light, and its voice was like wind through leaves. It was one of the Vakari, a species known for their quiet wisdom and short words. The tiny being didn't speak in full sentences, just one question. Did he choose? Lenara blinked. She leaned forward a little, whispering back, "What do you mean?" The Vakari tilted its small head, eyes blinking slowly. "The old ones, they do not stare for nothing." Before she could ask more, the Vakari turned and walked away, vanishing into a fold in the room's design. Lenara sat back slowly. The words echoed in her head. They do not stare for nothing. Was that what had happened? Had she been chosen? For what? The council session began to wind down for the day. The speakers grew fewer, and the lights dimmed, slightly in signal. Delegates began to leave in quiet waves, escorted by aides and guards. Lenara stayed seated, her eyes fixed again on the shadowed corner of the room. But now, Vorthak's seat was empty. She stood slowly, unsure of whether to be relieved or disappointed. She turned to gather her notes, but a sound behind her made her pause. It wasn't loud, just the faint tapping of claws against metal. She turned her head, just enough to catch sight of a tall shape moving down one of the private corridors behind the council chamber. She didn't follow. She wasn't that bold. Not yet. But she watched, her eyes narrowing. She knew then that something had changed. That stare, that silence, wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Not a threat, but a signal. Vorthak had seen something, in her. Or maybe he had simply seen someone willing to look back. As she left the chamber with the rest of her team, Lenara kept her head high, her steps steady. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready. The morning of the second council day began with the same slow routine. Lights glowed from the curved ceiling panels as soft music played in the background, meant to calm nerves before heavy talks began. Delegates entered in quiet groups, many, reviewing notes or discussing in hushed tones with their aides. Lenara Vale sat alone at the human delegations table. Her teammates were still in a strategy meeting, but she had arrived early, needing a moment to gather herself. The silence from the previous day still clung to her. That quiet stare across the room, the way General Vorthak had seen her, stayed in her mind like a mark she couldn't wash away. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something more. Maybe it was awe. She had spent her life studying alien culture, language, and diplomacy. But nothing in the books or simulations had ever prepared her for a moment like that. A moment without words that said more than any sentence could. Lenara looked across the chamber again. The seat where Vorthak had been the day before was still empty. A small part of her felt disappointed. Another part felt relief. She wasn't sure which was stronger. Delegates from other species began to file in, taking their places. Bright colors, glowing eyes, feathers, scales, and light. So many shapes and languages all gathered here for peace. Or at least for something like it. Just as the council speaker, a tall being made of mist and silver rings, began to speak, the large double doors at the far end opened. There was no announcement. No fanfare. Only silence and footsteps. General Vorthak entered without hurry. His presence filled the room without sound. He didn't glance around, didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to his chair and sat down with the ease of someone used to being watched. The room seemed to shift slightly as he did, like the very air adjusted to make space for him. Lenara kept her eyes forward this time, but she felt it when he looked at her. It wasn't like before. It wasn't a challenge or a surprise. It felt more like confirmation, as if he had already decided something and was now simply checking that she was still here. Talks continued, though many in the room seemed distracted. Lenara listened to discussions about trade routes and border disputes, about shared research and resource agreements. But in her heart she knew something else was happening, something not written on the agenda. Her skin prickled with awareness. This wasn't about laws or treaties. This was something older, something that didn't need words. Then it happened. Without warning, General Vorthak stood. He didn't speak. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't even make a sound. But the act of rising, of simply standing in that still room, was enough to stop every voice, every gesture. The entire chamber fell into absolute silence. All eyes turned toward him. Lenara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't move. She didn't need to. The room, once full of conversation and light, now held its breath. Vorthak walked slowly, every step firm and measured. He walked across the chamber, not toward the speaker's platform, not toward another leader, but toward her. Toward Lenara. She heard whispers start and then die. She saw delegates lean forward, curious, cautious. Her heart pounded in her chest. She stood as he approached, her legs shaking slightly but her back straight. She didn't know what he wanted. She didn't know why he was doing this, but she stood because it felt right, because she had already decided she would not look away. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough for her to see the faint lines on his armor, the heat in his eyes, the deep stillness of a being who had lived through countless wars. He looked down at her not as a judge, not as a ruler, but as a question. Still, he said nothing. Lenara swallowed hard. She felt the weight of 1,000 thoughts pressing in on her. Every eye in the room was watching. She could feel the curiosity, the confusion, the doubt, and yet she also felt calm. Somewhere deep inside, past the nerves, she understood that this moment was not about fear or power. It was about truth. So she did something simple. She bowed her head. Not low, not out of submission. Just enough to show respect. Enough to say, "I see you and I understand." When she looked up again, Vorthak nodded once. A slow, deliberate movement. Then from a small pouch at his side, he drew a single token, flat, dark, and marked with an unfamiliar symbol. He held it out to her, waiting. Lenara reached out and took it with both hands. It was cool to the touch, heavier than it looked. She didn't know what the symbol meant, not yet. But she knew it was important. She knew it meant something had changed. Vorthak turned without a word and walked back to his seat. The silence held for a few more seconds, and then slowly, the room came back to life. Voices returned, soft at first, then louder. But nothing would be the same. Lenara sat down, holding the token carefully in her palm. Her team arrived minutes later, wide-eyed and whispering. But she didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Some words never had to be said to be heard. The stars outside the council station looked the same as they always did, cold, endless, unmoving. But everything inside had changed. In the weeks that followed General Vorthak's silent walk and the moment he placed the token in Lenara Vale's hands, word spread through the galaxy. No official announcement was made, no speech or written statement. But stories travel fast, especially those that carry weight without needing proof. Something had happened in the chamber that day, something everyone felt but few could explain. And the one at the center of it, Lenara, carried that moment with her wherever she went. She hadn't asked for attention. She didn't enjoy it either. Interviews, requests for comments, nods in the hallway from beings who had never acknowledged humans before. It was all new, and it felt strange. Earth's place in the interstellar council shifted in quiet but powerful ways. They were no longer just observers. They were no longer the young species others ignored or looked at with quiet amusement. The token Vorthak gave to Lenara held no political title, no legal demand. But those who recognized the mark on it knew what it meant. Recognition, not of a species but of a person, a human who had been seen, tested, and not found lacking. Lenara didn't wear the token. She kept it in a small case inside her desk, where she could open it now and then and think. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder, not of victory, but of stillness. The kind of stillness that speaks louder than sound. The kind that stays with you forever. After the council meetings ended, Lenara returned to Earth. The skies there seemed smaller now, the buildings shorter, the air less heavy. Still, she was glad to be home. She walked through quiet forests where she had once learned the value of listening. She visited the workshop where her father had taught her to shape metal, and she thought a lot about the silence, about the moment Vorthak had stood without speaking and how every voice had fallen still in response. People asked her what he had said. She always gave the same answer. He didn't speak, she'd say, and that was the point. Months passed, then years. Lenara chose not to stay in politics. Others wanted her to rise quickly through ranks, to speak for Earth, even to lead delegations. But that wasn't what she wanted. She became a teacher, a storyteller. She wrote about her experiences, not as reports or records, but as reflections. What it means to see and be seen, what it means to listen when others are speaking only with their eyes. Her classroom was simple, high in a building near Earth's main spaceport. From the windows, her students could see the dark sky stretch out like a promise. She taught not only about languages and alien customs, but about courage, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't raise its voice or carry a weapon. The kind that sits still, holds its ground, and meets the gaze of giants without turning away. One afternoon, a young student stayed behind after class. He was quiet, maybe 17 or 18, and had always sat near the back. He walked up to her desk looking nervous and finally asked, "How did you do it? That day when he stood and came to you?" Lenara smiled gently. She didn't answer, right away. She thought back to that moment, to the sound of his footsteps, to the way the room had held its breath. She remembered her heart beating so loud it drowned out the world, and the way her hands didn't shake even when everything inside her did. "I didn't run," she said at last. "I stayed." The boy nodded slowly, like that answer was heavier than he expected. She let the silence stretch between them. Then she added, "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is be still." That's what he saw. That I wasn't there to prove anything. I was just there. And I was present. Completely. Theo. Boy thanked her and left. Lenara watched him go, then turned to the window where a small ship lifted into the sky. She wondered how many moments like hers had happened out there, moments not recorded in files or remembered in votes but felt in silence. She believed that some of the most important events in history happened without anyone realizing it at the time. One evening, as she prepared her notes for the next class, a small package arrived. No return name, no message. Inside was a stone, round, smooth, and dark, with a symbol carved gently into the center. It was the same mark as the token Vorthak had given her years ago, but this time, it was carved into the stone's surface, not simply drawn. Below the symbol was a single line, written in an old dialect she had studied, but never seen used in real messages. It read, "Equal remembered." Lenara closed her eyes and smiled. Somewhere out there, in the far reaches of space, someone still remembered the moment they had shared. A moment with no words, no grand gesture, just silence filled with meaning. And in that silence, something new had begun.